All right, afternoon. My name is Sarah Schmidt. I know a lot of you all, many of you all are from CAP groups, and I'm the Arts Organization and Access Director here at the Kentucky Arts Council. So I do work primarily with those Kentucky Arts partner groups, but also any arts organization in the state. Every October, we present a series of online sessions in celebration of National Arts and Humanities Month as a special feature of our Creative Industry Summit series that we host all year long. This session, at least to me, selfishly, is especially important as we're nearing a significant season when it comes to public support for the arts. There's an election next week. Believe it or not, I had to double check two times to believe it. And then shortly after, the General Assembly is going to convene on January 3rd, I think, for a biennium budget session. So there are many unknowns currently when it comes to advocacy for public support for the arts, but the strategy stays the same even if the tactics have to change. And today we're going to be talking about how to make advocacy part of business as usual instead of waiting and scrambling in these pivotal times like the ones we're going to be experiencing in the next couple of months. And I am pleased to turn all of this over to Lori Meadows with Kentuckians for the Arts, KFTA, who will be sharing tips for incorporating advocacy into your day-to-day work, including how to begin acting now. She'll be exploring how to build the advocacy capacity of your staff and board and make advocacy part of your organization's culture. And Lori is certainly the right person to do this, which is why we ask her every year around this time to come speak with us about what's new and what's good in advocacy for the arts. She's the current chair of KFTA and an independent consultant in the areas of arts administration, nonprofit organizational management, public art, and historic textiles. And of course, before taking on these roles, she served as executive director of the Kentucky Arts Council from 2005 until 2016. I'd like to thank her for sharing her time and expertise today. We're very lucky to have someone who knows how this works, whether operating from the perspective of a state's arts agency, an arts nonprofit organization, or an advocacy group. So that's very unique and helpful perspective. We do want you all to have a chance to ask questions, but we're going to save the Q&A until the end. So please put those questions in the chat or hold for that portion. Depending on how many folks we have on this call, if it's very intimate, we'll open it up and you can ask those questions aloud. If there's quite a few people on, I'll read your questions out loud and have Lori answer them that way, just to make sure that nobody's trying to raise their hand and can't talk over each other and that type of thing. And now I'm going to pull up some slides for Lori. So just give us a minute to convert from me sharing myself to me sharing my screen and we'll get going. All right, how does that look to everybody? Is that good, Lori? You see your slides? Okay, good.
Yep, can see it. Thank you.
All right, whenever you're ready, and just let me know when you'd like me to advance. I'm going to.
Okay, I will. I'll, say slide when I'm ready. So, okay. Well, thanks, Sarah. I really appreciate it. And as always, I am glad that the Arts Council asked KFTA to partner with them on these advocacy sessions. First, just a little bit of information about Kentuckians for the Arts. We're the only organization in the state that advocates for the arts across all disciplines and genres, the creative industry and arts education. The organization provides information and education about the impact and value of the arts, increases public awareness regarding the importance of the arts, and ensures that the arts are an ongoing part of the public dialogue. We're a nonprofit, nonpartisan service organization and are volunteer-led and managed. So today, we're going to talk about ways to incorporate advocacy into your organization's day-to-day work. And whether you're advocating for public policy and funding supportive of the arts and creative industry, advocating for issues in your community, or advocating specifically for your organization Basically, the concepts are the same. Building the advocacy capacity of your staff and board and making advocacy a part of your organization's culture are key components in being an effective advocate. Your organization's leadership, including both board and staff, can really be powerful advocates and should be at the forefront of building public understanding and support by elected officials. Slide, please, Sarah. So how do you build this advocacy culture within your organization? First, there are a few foundational pieces that your organization's leadership, both board and staff, should understand and be familiar with why advocating for the arts is critical. What you can legally do as a nonprofit, state-funded organization, how to relate background information to the current issue, and what to advocate for and the right time to do so. Why is it important for us to advocate for the arts? Well, as arts administrators and arts supporters, we have the expertise and the firsthand knowledge to voice our educated opinion about decisions that are being made by elected officials at every level. These could be threats to policies or funding or opportunities to take advantage of changes in the landscape. They also might involve issues that will either be resolved quickly or that are going to take a long time. Slide. Traditionally, the nonprofit arts community hasn't been a strong advocate for itself, and yet we wonder why we may not be making as much progress as other sectors. This has changed somewhat over the last 2 to 3 years, and advocacy needs to continue to grow and be considered an integral part of all of our work. Sonia Campion is the president of the Campion Advocacy Fund, and she makes the case that many nonprofits still don't view advocacy as mission critical, and those that do haven't activated their organization's leadership to support the effort. This requires a big shift in how we view our work and our role in it. And she said, when talking about advocacy, we need to take a hard look at our work to see what the effects are. We need the ability to say that we've been doing this for too long and we're not making enough of a difference. We have to move faster. We have to go all out now. So if you represent an organization that benefits from public funding, it's your responsibility to explain to decision makers how important that funding is to help achieve your mission to serve the public and to thank those who make that funding possible. Elected officials want to hear from their constituents. They need to know regarding what they value and what's important to them. They might not be aware of issues relevant to the arts and the day-to-day realities that organizations face. If they don't hear from the public about their interest in and opinions about policies for the arts, including funding, they assume there's no interest. We have to speak up. Slide. And you will hear me over the months, over the years, continue to say this. The most important thing to remember is if we don't advocate for the arts, who will? Slide. There's often confusion about what's meant by advocacy and what the staff and board members of a nonprofit organization can legally do in terms of advocacy. So really simply, advocacy is when individuals publicly express their interest in specific causes and take action to support the positive advancement of those causes. So advocacy is a means of creating change. Slide. And what are nonprofit organizations legally allowed to do? These charts are, this one and the next one, are provided by the National Assembly of State Arts Agencies. And I think they are one of the most clear and simple to understand explanations of the difference between the various levels. And you can find them on the KFTA website in the advocacy toolkit. So first of all, education. 501c3 organizations can educate or inform elected officials, decision and policy makers, and the public about the arts. This includes having conversations. It might be conducting educational meetings and preparing and distributing educational materials. There are no restrictions on this. Advocacy. Organizations can advocate for the value the arts provide to the Commonwealth and the benefits of funding. For example, the state arts agency, the Kentucky Arts Council. There are no restrictions on the amount of advocacy that can be done by organizations. Lobbying. Organizations can also lobby for or against specific legislation up to a specific percentage of their overall budget. For example, an organization with a budget of $500,000 would have to direct 20% or more of its expenditures toward lobbying purposes to be outside the legal limits. For a nonprofit arts organization carrying out its mission, it's almost impossible to meet that expenditure limit. Electioneering, organizations cannot electioneer, or in other words, endorse or oppose political candidates for elected office. Slide. The second slide at the bottom shows specific examples of what education, advocacy, lobbying, and electioneering may entail. And again, you can find these slides on the KFTA website. Slide. If you're interested in more specific information, you can access an expenditure test for your organization for measuring lobbying activity on the IRS website. And that site also provides additional detail regarding the legal limits. So that's another source for you. So as you're thinking about advocacy, it's important to be aware of and understand the background of the current issue you want to address. If you want to talk to state legislators about the need for funding for the Kentucky Arts Council, you need to understand the role of the Arts Council in the Commonwealth. It's part of state government, and it's the official state arts agency currently housed in the Tourism, Arts, and Heritage Cabinet. I say it that way because over the years, cabinets have been revised and the agency has been in different places. For the last two legislative election cycles, KFTA issued an arts questionnaire to all legislative candidates, asking in part if they were aware of the Kentucky Arts Council. It's not at all unusual for candidates to respond that they're not aware of the agency, or even after being in the legislature for a period of time, to not understand that it's part of state government and the scope of work that it encompasses. So if you're able to discuss the background and the current status of the KAC, it makes you a more effective and confident advocate. Slide. Brief background on the KAC. The National Endowment for the Arts was created in 1965 as a means to direct national funding for the arts to states that establish state arts agencies to receive those federal funds. The Kentucky Arts Commission, now the Kentucky Arts Council, was established by executive order in 1965 by Governor Ed Breathitt and confirmed by enabling legislation in 1966 as the official state arts agency, with a legislative purpose to develop and promote a broadly conceived state policy of support for the arts in Kentucky. Slide. That legislative purpose, along with the duties and functions of the agency, and there are several that are legislated, remain in place. So every U.S. state and territory has a state arts agency that's the only entity to receive partnership funding from the National Endowment for the Arts. And to do so, the agencies have to meet several benchmarks and requirements, and also, and this is important, receive funding from the state legislature in an amount equal to or more than the NEA funding that's received. So that explains how the NEA was formed and where it fits into state government. What about the funding? Obviously, the more funding the Kentucky Arts Council receives, the more programs and services it's able to provide, and the more grant and award funds it's able to distribute. Let's take a look at the Arts Council's state funding history. Sarah, slide. So you can see from this chart, and please pay particular attention to those numbers in red. The one at the top, of course, is the fiscal year 2023 funding. And the next point down in the red is its highest point of funding. And the bottom, that was in 1987. That was when the funding last reached its current low, 1987. And that doesn't account for inflation. The highest point in 2001, the Arts Council received from the legislature about $4.5 million. The per capita funding at that time was $1.12 for every person in the Commonwealth. And so, again, for the last 22 years, this funding has declined. Slide, please. This graphic, if you can see it, Kentucky is the little red dot among those other circles. It illustrates how the Arts Council compares to other southern states in receipt of state funding. With the exception of Georgia, Kentucky receives the least amount. The 2024 Kentucky legislative session, as Sarah mentioned, is a budget session. It begins on, I believe, Sarah, January 2nd. That's what the legislative calendar says. And it runs for 60 legislative days, meaning it will end about April 15th. You know, there are some times when maybe there has to be a pause, maybe the weather's bad or something. So it can't say exactly what the date is, but it has to be 60 legislative days. This session, and the budget session happens every 2 years, is going to set the Arts Council's budget or its legislative funding for fiscal year 2025 and fiscal year 2026. Next slide, please. Okay, now let's look at specifics for the 2023 state funding the Arts Council received. So the per capita funding from the state legislature is 40 cents. You know, compare that to over $1 previously. This ranks Kentucky number 45 out of 50 states. Now, if you look at that within the big picture of state government, the total general fund expenditures are $14,202 million. KAC's funding is, let's say, 1.8 million. That percentage of the state general fund expenditures, and I had to keep checking myself on how to say this, but it's right, 0.013%, 13 thousandths of 1% of Kentucky's expenditures goes to the Arts Council. So pretty amazing when you think about it. And I'm going to leave that slide up for a bit. So there are lots of different ways to advocate for the arts and a lot of different entities to whom you can advocate. One of the key factors in being an effective advocate is knowing the appropriate audience for your message and making sure that you tailor your communication to fit your audience. There's a difference between advocating specifically for your organization and advocating for policy or funding to benefit a broader constituency, and a right time to do each. If you're educating about the overall value and role of the arts, that can and should happen anytime. If you're advocating for local funding to benefit your organization, then your message is about your specific organization and how it serves the community. And your audience is local city and county elected officials. If you're maybe responding to a call for action to support federal funding for the National Endowment for the Arts or federal policies that support arts education, then your audience is your district congressman and or your 2 state senators, depending on what phase the budget negotiations are in, federal budget negotiations. And your message is how the funding for the NEA or the proposed policies benefit Kentucky overall. If your organization has received direct funding from the NEA, and a lot of Kentucky organizations have, tell the story of how it serves the public with that funding. If you've received funding or benefited from any program at the Kentucky Arts Council, you're also benefiting from NEA funds, and that's part of your message. So I know a lot of you today are affiliated with organizations that receive some type of assistance or funding support from the Kentucky Arts Council. And as I mentioned earlier, the Arts Council's funding for everything comes from NEA dollars and funding allocation in the state budget. Advocating to your state legislators as a KAC funded or assisted organization means demonstrating the public value your organization provides through its receipt of state tax dollars and the importance of those funds to help you provide arts activities and service to the public. So as state funding for the KAC is diminished, the ability of the organization to provide grants, programs, and services has, of course, also diminished. If your organization has been a recipient of operating support, Kentucky Arts Partnership support, you might have seen this reflected in your grant awards. For multiple years, around the years surrounding 2010, the Arts Council was able to award $1.8 million in grants to Kentucky Arts Partnership Organization. That's to that one single grant program. That's more than the total Arts Council now receives from the state general fund. Excuse me. So public funds are particularly important in today's fiscal environment as organizations are still working to regain their audiences and rebuild revenue after the pandemic, and philanthropic giving continues to decline. We've seen that over the past year or so. As you speak to legislators, talk about how your organization is part of the larger arts infrastructure in the state. It's not enough to talk about the work you're doing. Tie it to how that work is benefiting the people of the state and the issue at hand, whether it's policy or funding. So if you go in and you meet with your state legislator and you say, I want to talk about my organization, XYZ, that's in Clark, Kentucky, and you only talk about your organization and the great work it's doing, you're not making that connection. The legislator may not understand that what you're really doing is talking about how important that funding is to the Kentucky Arts Council. Keep in mind that the purpose of the Kentucky Arts Partnership Grant Program is to ensure that the people of Kentucky have year-round access to be able to participate in the arts. And your organization is helping make that happen with those funds. So the overall message that you want to share is how the state funding distributed to organizations via the Arts Council enables them to serve the public in positive ways. The legislature has so many issues and bills to consider that if funding for the Arts Council isn't specifically brought to their attention, it's not going to be on their radar as they go through budget preparations and negotiations. So to demonstrate the magnitude of what takes place during the legislative session, I did a little bit of research, and during the 2023 session, approximately 280 bills and 250 resolutions were introduced by the Senate. Approximately 590 bills and 100 resolutions were introduced in the House. Keep in mind that this was a short legislative session. Then if you look at the state budget, volume 1, and there are 2 volumes of the 22 through 24 state budget, is 335 pages. The KAC budget is a single page out of that. So if we want to see the funding improve as artists, administrators, board members, supporters, we have to advocate for it. And just a reminder that while the KAC board is able to advocate for increased funding for the agency, the KAC staff is not legally allowed to do so. So if we think about everything that the Arts Council as an agency does for our organizations, for our artists, for the Commonwealth, let's help the Arts Council out some and advocate for the arts. Again, if we don't do it, who's going to? Slide, please. So, as we work together to build awareness of the need for policies and funding that are supportive of the arts, it affects the arts and creative infrastructure of the entire state, and including, of course, your organization. The old saying that a rising tide lifts all boats is true, and everyone in the arts community, as well as the public, benefits when the arts are considered important state and community assets. This is where advocacy can help you meet your mission as a nonprofit arts organization. These excerpts on the slide are from Kentucky Nonprofit Arts Organization's mission statements, and they reflect the public benefit provided by the work of the organizations. Advocacy to enhance the state of the arts in the Commonwealth it will help enable organizations further enrich lives, enhance quality of life, build community, and contribute to the well-being of the community. Slide, please. So, how do you go about making advocacy part of your organization's culture? The things we've discussed so far actually provide the foundation on which to make advocacy part of that culture. Incorporating advocacy into your work is as important as any other day-to-day program, management, or governance activity, and it shouldn't be considered an occasional or once-a-year activity. We all know that the staff of art and creative nonprofits are stretched incredibly thin. This is particularly true after the past few years, and advocacy may seem like one more thing to add to the never-ending list. So taking on advocacy might seem challenging, but with leadership and planning, it can become ingrained in the culture of your organization. And we all know that if nothing else, arts organizations know how to get things done. True cultural change happens when advocacy has become fully integrated into your organization's work plan, decision making, and communications. Everyone's voice is needed, and staff and board members can both play important roles. The most important factor is a commitment from both board and staff to develop and implement advocacy goals and strategies. And this might start with a conversation between leadership of both board and staff, and then it should include strategic discussion that will inform your plans. It's critical to ensure that there's consensus on incorporating advocacy into the work of the organization, and an understanding of how advocacy can align with and support the mission of the organization. Slide. It's important that both board and staff are involved in the advocacy, and the advocacy committee of an organization should have representation from both. Engagement in the day-to-day work of the organization by staff, along with governance and policy setting by the board, represent two critical points of view. The board needs to understand how the organization would be impacted if there were major shifts in federal, state, or governmental policies or funding streams, and the importance of educating policymakers about the impact of these decisions. The board also needs to understand investments that may need to be made to enable the organization to enact an effective advocacy plan. These might be investments in time, staff, or finances, and it's important to make sure everybody's on the same page. Board members often bring position and connection to their role, and advocacy should be included in every board member's job description. As unpaid volunteers, it's very powerful to have board members speak to elected officials on behalf of supportive arts policies and funding, and they might be able to open doors that a staff member can't. Staff can help educate the board and connect the dots regarding the ecosystem in which the organization operates and how different policies or fundings affect it and the overall arts infrastructure. Staff are well versed in the effect details of public policy decisions mean and need to provide concrete information about impact and help board members find language that they feel comfortable with. Staff can also explain the connection between advocacy and budgets. If your organization has government funding, make sure there's a clear understanding of how advocacy can affect that income, and be prepared to explain the possible costs related to advocacy, whether it's training, travel costs to attend advocacy convenings, printed materials, or other expenses. If advocacy is truly a part of your organization's work, it should be included in the budget. So as board and staff work together, it's important to set clear guidelines for the messages to convey. Talking points and materials should be developed with a unified organizational voice, particularly on issues that might be perceived as more controversial. Slide. Identify and utilize the support needed to develop and build the advocacy capacity of your board and staff. Training and learning opportunities might include guidance or education on the process, the message, the connection between your organization and the issue, the current public policy environment, or how best to engage with elected officials. There's information about several of those items, again, on the KFTA website in the Advocacy Toolkit. Adequate preparation is going to enable people to effectively engage in advocacy efforts and present the issue with confidence. Slide. So what kind of tools do you need to effectively advocate? The specifics are going to be different for every organization, but these are just a few examples. Again, the Advocacy Toolkit on the KFTA website. Look at the materials your organization already produces, annual reports, brochures, that sort of thing. Research the materials and the data available on the websites of Kentuckians for the Arts, the Arts Council, the National Endowment for the Arts, and Americans for the Arts. If you're a CAP grantee, the public value reports prepared by the KAC with your individual data are provided in a format that makes it really easy for you to share them. The public value title is very intentional. These reports illustrate the public value the organizations that receive operating support from the Kentucky Arts Council provide and the return on investment that's created by those public dollars. Slide. It's important to remember that you're not alone in this work, and the most effective advocacy is when people are working together. More voices equal more power, and working with other organizations and constituents is important. Who else in your community is interested in the same policy issues? How can you work together to develop strategies? It might be necessary to overcome existing power dynamics or turf issues, but enhancing these relationships and working together on advocacy can help stakeholders solve problems together. Use the talking points that KFTA provides and share them with your colleagues. It's never helpful for legislators to receive conflicting information or messages. Brainstorm about new partners that might be interested in working together on your priority issues. And these may not always be arts partners, arts or creative partners. Search online for information about your policy priorities and note who else is being affected and quoted. Connect with them. Make time to meet with these stakeholders to discuss common interests and ways to collaborate, and discuss how your organization can be a resource to local community leaders and elected officials. Look at ways that you can help others with their priorities. Slide. So just like any organizational, strategic, or operational plan, an advocacy plan will help you determine your goals, your actions, and the expected outcomes for advocacy. Remember that advocacy is a continuous process based on voicing your support, establishing relationships, and providing education based on personal stories as well as data. Advocacy plans will also help you intentionally organize. So when there's a call for action, you have the resources to respond and you know who will carry that message. Slide. It might be helpful to begin with facilitated conversations as you identify the advocacy work in which your organization wants to engage. Discussion of the items below will help determine the components to include in your plan. And I believe this webinar will be shared later. And so you don't have to worry about writing these down. They will be available, but I'll just run through them really quickly. Look at things like how effectively your organization is able to monitor the external environment. Look at the relationships and partnerships and collaborations you need to develop. What are the mechanisms needed to stay up to date on funding and policy issues? Are you able to analyze how specific policy issues might affect your organization and your community? What materials do you need to develop? What research do you need to conduct? And what training may be needed? These are all important things to look at. Use the discussions, the questions asked, and the responses and information gathered for your working agenda for your meetings to help determine objectives, strategies, and action steps to develop your plan. And again, you can access more information about this on the KFTA website. Slide. Once you develop and implement your advocacy plan and strategies, it's important to be consistent with your efforts. The only way to ensure that advocacy is part of the culture of your organization is by sustaining the changes you make. And over time, those efforts become as familiar as the rest of your work. Slide. So, what are a few things that you can do in the next few weeks to advocate as you look at incorporating advocacy into your culture? Well, especially with the election coming up a week from today, vote. That's always the number one thing you can do to advocate. If you vote, you'll feel more engaged in the overall political process. So it's an important thing to do. Start that advocacy conversation with your board and your staff. Read the monthly KAC newsletters to find out what the agency's doing. And if you're a CAP organization, the newsletters that are sent out by Sarah Schmidt. Join Kentuckians for the Arts. And a plug, we're the only advocacy organization in the state that serves all genres and mediums of the art. Make sure your advocacy representative, and this is something that's required for CAP organizations, also is receiving information from KFTA. In addition to the monthly newsletter and calendar we produce, there are messages sent to those on our contact list. And if there are issues important to Kentucky arts organizations, we send special email communications. Review the advocacy toolkit and the other information on the KFTA website. We update this periodically, so there are always new things being added. Make sure your legislators are on your mailing list and your invitation list. Sign up for their newsletters and join their social media. Engage with your legislators before the session begins. Write to tell them how important the KAC is to your organization and the community, and ask your board members to write as well. If you're receiving grants from the Arts Council, of course, it's a requirement that you write that letter. Send them a handwritten note. Let them know what you're doing and offer to serve as a resource. Again, make that personal connection. Always, always, always publicly acknowledge elected officials who may attend your events and send them a thank you afterwards, whether they're with a body that provides funding to you or not. They took the time to attend, and there are a lot of other things that they could be doing. Begin gathering your team to attend Arts Day in Frankfurt on January 10th to voice your support for the arts. You'll be hearing a lot more about this. Make sure you're connected to the KFTA communication systems, Facebook membership communications, the email list for organization leaders and advocacy contact. And think about whether you're just beginning to think about advocacy or your organization's already engaged in advocating for the arts. It's important to remember that there's strength in numbers. And without communication and engagement from constituents, legislators will not know there's a need. Let's work together to build a coalition to show Kentucky's support for the arts and creative industry. And final slide. Thanks, Sarah. And are there any, I don't know if anybody has any questions, but I'm happy to answer them if you do.
Yeah, I've put a prompt in the chat to remind people that they can put their questions there. But I have at least one. You mentioned that even if you're in a small community, sometimes you will find peers or at least similar organizations or at least organizations that have interest in similar policies. What are some of the groups that are usually uh, allies, I guess, of the arts when it comes to public policy that you've seen?
Well, certainly anything that would be, in the arts and humanities realm. Look at your local historical associate. Oh,
I'm
sorry, I
sorry, I
just.
stopped sharing the slide. No, that was
Oh,
mine.
okay. I thought
Didn't.
maybe
I did
my
not warn you.
computer had gone off. Okay.
No.
Um, certainly those type of things, but also social service organizations. That's a big one. Is there some kind of partnership that you can do? A lot of social service organizations are doing programming, special programming. And is there a way that you can partner? Maybe you can work on um, programming for children, program for students, schools. Schools are a huge, can be a huge partner. As we have seen, as the assessment has left the public school, as arts has left the assessment for public schools, we've seen a lot of during the day arts education fall out. There are ways that arts organizations, and lots of them are doing this, are partnering with schools. So, and it might not just be on funding, again, those policy issues. Of course, something the Kentucky arts education and arts community is interested in is one day getting that assessment back. So, just kind of look around. Are there things that your city government is interested in doing? Maybe they're interested in having some kind of festival or some kind of special commemorative day. How can you assist with that and be viewed more of a partner in the entire community and not just this standalone arts organization? I think Michael Cochran's comment that he just made is really good.
Yeah,
Um,
Michael just wrote, I find that advocating to local mayors, city councils, and chamber of commerce leaders helps the grassroots support up to state and federal officials.
yeah,
What do you think about
that's
that?
I think that's really important, and I'm sorry I didn't think to say it because, all politics are local. Your local officials are going to be connected with a lot of the state and federal officials. In fact, those people switch positions back and forth. Maybe they're a legislator right now. Um, Maybe later they'll be on the city council or vice versa. The same thing with federal officials. Making relationships with all of them is really important.
And Lori, I have a follow-up question to that.
Uh-huh.
So suppose you do have a great relationship with your county judge executive, your mayor, but you don't have that same kind of rapport with your state senator, state representative. I
Uh-huh.
get one of the most common questions I get is like, I don't know these people. I personally have not followed them for various reasons. How do I even start to make a relationship with somebody who represents me in Frankfurt? Do you have any advice? Like, what do you just call them up?
Yeah.
How do you even get a inroad?
Sometimes it's hard to get through on the phone. I have found real good luck in sending emails. Um, And, you can go to the Legislative Research Commission to the website, it's part of state government, and you can look up contact information for all of your state legislators. That information is also available on the KFTA website under the advocacy toolkit. There's a link for both congressional and legislative contacts. So I'm sorry I got lost in the second part of that and need to go back to the first part. So yeah, send them a communication. it's really, really important to remember that these people are in Frankfurt or in their local offices or in their federal offices to serve us. They're there to serve the public. And so they need to know what we want them to know, what we need to say to them. So, yeah, communicate with them. It's great to make that first communication before they get to Frankfurt. Contact them, ask them if you can come and see, invite them to your place. If you're an organization, you don't have to wait until there is an event going on. In fact, I was at a national advocacy convening recently, and someone said what they really like to do is bring somebody in as there may be staging a performance, setting things up so that they can see the work that goes into what's being done. Invite them in, see what's going on, ask to take them for a cup of coffee. I mean, nobody needs to be scared of their elected officials. And I think a lot of the time especially if you say, I want to hear what you would like to see and how can we be a resource to you. So yeah, don't be nervous or scared at all. It's, the first time might be a little bit nerve wracking, but after that, it becomes more commonplace and you're used to it. And then lots of times, they may become your friend. So that's an important thing too.
Yeah, I would also add, this doesn't have to be the best friends club. You don't have to be their soulmate to educate
No,
them about what they're doing. Alternatively, um, or rather, they never assume because of their platform or because of their party's platform that they don't want to support the arts. That's absolutely not true.
yes,
It is not a, it is, it is pluralistic. Um, it is a shared, agenda for both parties, I would say.
yes, the arts need to be nonpartisan. And there may be perhaps your legislator, you happen to know their position on various issues, and you may be in direct opposition to your views, may be in direct opposition to their views. It doesn't matter. You're not going in to talk about well, you could, but that's not what we're talking about. You're going in to talk about the arts and how the arts support and benefit the entire state. And that does not need to be partisan. So, yeah, absolutely.
And Mimi asked what the best address to use for communication with elected officials, and I think we covered that a little bit. Go to LRC, and that's going to give you the Legislative Research Commission, and that's going to give you the contact you need. And Michael added, don't underestimate relationships with the staff of elected leaders and their field offices. That's true
Yes.
because those people do tend to move around a little bit too, I've noticed.
They do. And yeah, absolutely. And, you can oftentimes get meetings with staff where you can't get a meeting with maybe your congressman or your legislator, and that's okay, and follow up with that person. I know I've been in meetings where the staff is in there and you have to wait for the elected official to come in, and I always try to start the conversation and just say, so do you have an interest in the arts? Are you connected to the arts in any way? And there's usually something that they will bring up, or they might say, no, not at all, but I really like music. Okay, great, that's your starting point. So yes, you do have a connection to the arts.
Carol said some organizations can offer legislators neutral meeting spaces in their home
Yes.
districts. That's true. There's
Yeah, that's
um,
an
the
excellent
asset of
point.
space.
Yes, that's very good. Let me see. Okay, I see that Tamara had put yes.
Oh, yes.
KFTA has both organizational and individual memberships. Individual memberships are $25. Organizational memberships depend on the size of your organization's budget. I'm not going to be able to rattle those off because I just can't remember. But if you have an organizational membership, there can be gosh, I'll get it wrong, so I don't want to say it, but you can have more than one representative receive that information through an organizational membership. And that's a good way to also have your advocacy representative that is required for your CAP application. That should be one of those people, on there. Don't let that person just be someone who said, "Oh yeah, I'm willing to do it," and then they're not really interested in following up in any way. That doesn't help you. It doesn't help them. It doesn't help the overall effort either. So that's important. In terms of training available to new members, not specifically, but if an organization asks us to speak to a group, perhaps it would have to be more than just a couple of people. We have done that via Zoom and are happy to do so.
Okay. And I have a short little poll that I want to put up on the screen while I'm making a few final notes. If you still have questions, feel free to put them in the chat and we can either send them via email or address them. I'm going to end the recording too.